I watched from backstage as my sister Claire stumbled onto the gymnasium stage, the rhinestone tiara catching the spotlight like a disco ball. Her face was flushed, her eyes glassy, and she was swaying in those stolen designer heels, my heels. The crowd's applause started strong, then faltered. Someone laughed, then another. Within seconds, the entire senior class was howling as Claire tried to curtsy and nearly face-planted into the microphone stand. This wasn't how it happened the first time. The first time, I was the one on that stage. I was the one wearing that crown, and I was the one who got drugged, humiliated, and destroyed in front of everyone I knew. But that was another life, literally. I died 3 months after that prom night, broken and alone in a psychiatric facility where my family had dumped me like garbage. Now I was back, 17 again, with all my memories intact and a burning desire to rewrite every single page of this nightmare. And the rewrite started tonight. Let me take you back 6 months, to the moment I opened my eyes in my childhood bedroom and realized I'd been given the rarest gift in the universe, a second chance. The sunlight was streaming through my pink curtains I'd begged my mother to replace when I was 15, curtains that had been gone for 2 years in my previous timeline. My hands were smaller, softer, unmarked by the self-harm scars I'd accumulated in those final, desperate months. My phone showed a date that made my heart stop. January 15th, 6 months before junior prom, 8 months before everything fell apart. I sat up slowly, my mind racing through possibilities and probabilities. Was this real? Was I dreaming? I pinched myself hard enough to leave a mark. Pain bloomed sharp and clear. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through messages, finding conversations I'd long forgotten, plans I'd made with friends who eventually abandoned me, enthusiastic texts from my boyfriend Derek, who would later testify against me in court. Court. The memory made bile rise in my throat. In my previous life, I'd been arrested 2 weeks after prom on charges of assault and drug possession, charges my own sister had orchestrated with the help of my mother. They'd planted evidence in my room, paid off witnesses, and convinced everyone I knew that I'd had a psychotic break. My father, weak as always, had simply signed the papers to commit me. I'd spent 3 months in that facility, medicated into a stupor, before I'd managed to end it all with a bedsheet and a door hinge. But now I was back, and I remembered everything. The first few days were disorienting. I kept expecting to wake up back in that sterile hospital room, but every morning I opened my eyes to find myself still 17, still alive, still trapped in a house with the people who would eventually destroy me. My sister Claire was 14, already beautiful in that effortless way that had always made me feel like a troll by comparison. My God. Mother Patricia was 42 and elegant, the kind of woman who lunched with socialites and chaired charity galas. My father, Robert, was a corporate lawyer who worked 80-hour weeks and barely noticed his daughters existed. The dynamics were already in place. Claire was the favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong. I was the disappointment, the daughter who tried too hard and never quite measured up. In my first life, I'd spent years trying to win their approval, competing in every academic competition, joining every club, maintaining a perfect GPA. It had never been enough. Claire just had to exist, and she was showered with love and praise. This time, I wasn't going to play that game. I spent the first week observing, remembering, planning. I watched Claire flirt with my boyfriend Derek at the dinner table while my mother smiled indulgently. I listened to my mother criticize my appearance, my clothes, my friends, my grades, even though I had a 4.0 and Claire was barely scraping by with a C average. I noted every slight, every manipulation, every moment of casual cruelty that I'd internalized as normal in my previous life. And I started building my case. The thing about being reborn with full knowledge of the future is that you become a prophet. You know which stocks will soar, which businesses will fail, which relationships will implode. But more importantly, you know exactly who your enemies are and exactly how they'll try to destroy you. You have the ultimate advantage, time and knowledge. I knew that Claire would steal my prom dress. I knew she'd spike my drink with a cocktail of anxiety medication and alcohol. I knew she'd plant drugs in my locker and tip off the principal. I knew my mother would support her every step of the way, and my father would be too busy or too cowardly to intervene. I knew Derek would cheat on me with Claire the week before prom, and I knew they'd both laugh about it behind my back. Most importantly, I knew that the crown, the junior prom crown that I'd won fair and square through a combination of academic excellence and genuine popularity, would be stolen from me at the moment of my greatest triumph. Claire would claim I'd had an episode and needed to be removed from the stage. She'd accept the crown in my place, playing the concerned sister while I was dragged out by security, drugged out of my mind and incoherent. Not this time. I started with the small things. In my previous life, I'd given Claire my Netflix password, and she'd used it to catfish multiple boys at her school, pretending to be older and more sophisticated. This had never come to light, but I'd found the evidence on her laptop after she'd carelessly left it unlocked one day. This time, I took screenshots of everything before she could delete it. I created a secure cloud folder and started uploading evidence. Next, I tackled the Derek situation. In my first life, I'd been blindly in love with him, unable to see the signs that he was a shallow, status-obsessed snake who was only dating me because I was popular and made him look good. This time, I saw him clearly. He was handsome but dumb, charming but cruel, and desperately insecure beneath his quarterback swagger. I also knew he'd been cheating on me with at least 3 other girls, including my own sister. Instead of confronting him, I gathered evidence. I installed a hidden app on his phone when he left it unlocked at my house, something I'd learned how to do from a true crime podcast in my previous life. The app mirrored all his messages to my email. Within a week, I had screenshots of him sexting Claire, complaining about me to his friends, and planning to humiliate me at prom as part of some sick bet. Beautiful. I also knew that my mother was embezzling from her charity foundation. In my previous life, this had never come to light because I'd been too destroyed to investigate, and Claire was too shallow to care. But I remembered odd conversations, suspicious phone calls, the way my mother's personal shopping had escalated while the foundation's accounts were mysteriously running low. This time, I paid attention. I intercepted bank statements from the mail. I took photos of receipts I found in her purse. I recorded phone conversations using my laptop. By March, I had enough evidence to destroy my entire family. But I needed to be strategic. Releasing everything at once would be messy and potentially backfire. I needed them to hang themselves, to execute their plan against me so that their villainy would be undeniable. Only then could I reveal the truth and watch them crumble. The hard part was enduring the abuse while pretending everything was normal. Claire's snide comments about my appearance, my mother's constant criticism, my father's indifference. It all hurt just as much the second time around, even though I knew it was coming. Some nights I lay in bed crying, wondering if I was strong enough to see this through. But then I'd remember that hospital room, the hopelessness, the way my mother had looked at me with disgust when she signed the commitment papers. I'd remember Claire smirking as she left the facility, crown still perched on her head in my memory. And I'd remember why I was doing this. April brought the prom dress incident. In my previous life, my mother had taken me shopping for a beautiful lavender gown, a rare moment of seeming maternal affection. I'd loved that dress, felt beautiful in it for the first time in months. Then the day before prom, Claire had accidentally spilled bleach on it. My mother had given Claire her own backup dress, a stunning crimson number that had been meant for a different event, and told me I could wear one of Claire's old dresses, a frumpy yellow thing that made me look jaundiced. This time, I bought 2 dresses. The lavender one, which I brought home and displayed prominently in my closet, and a secret one, a midnight blue silk gown that I kept hidden in my friend Jessica's house. I also installed a hidden camera in my room, something I'd purchased with the money I'd made from carefully betting on sports games I knew the outcomes to. Sure enough, the night before prom, Claire snuck into my room with a bottle of bleach. I watched from the hallway as she ruined the lavender dress, her face twisted in concentration and malice. The camera captured everything in high definition. I pretended to discover the damage the next morning, crying appropriately while my mother comforted Claire for being startled by my reaction. "You're so dramatic," my mother sighed, examining the ruined dress. "Claire, honey, give her the yellow dress from last year." "But Mom, that dress is—" I started. "You should be grateful, Anna," my mother snapped. "Maybe if you took better care of your things, this wouldn't happen. The bleach was probably from that science project you were working on." I hadn't had a science project in months. but I nodded, playing the defeated daughter while mentally adding this interaction to my growing list of evidence. I wore the yellow dress to Jessica's house, where I changed into the midnight blue gown. It fit like a dream, making my dark hair and pale skin look ethereal rather than washed out. Jessica wolf whistled when I emerged from her bathroom. "You look like a princess," she said, sis. "Claire's going to die when she sees you." "That's the plan," I murmured. Prom was at the Riverside Hotel, a fancy venue that our school rented every year. In my previous life, I'd arrived excited and nervous, holding Derek's hand, believing that this would be the perfect night. Instead, it had been the beginning of the end. This time, I arrived alone. I'd broken up with Derek 2 weeks earlier, claiming I needed to focus on my studies. He'd been confused and angry, which had only intensified his texts to Claire. Perfect. The gymnasium was decorated in silver and gold with fairy lights strung across the ceiling and a professional DJ spinning current hits. My classmates were already dancing, the energy high and infectious. I spotted Claire immediately. She was wearing a red dress that was almost identical to the one my mother had given her in my previous timeline, laughing with her friends near the punch bowl. The punch bowl. I felt a chill run down my spine. In my previous life, Claire had spiked my drink with a mixture of her mother's anxiety medication and vodka sometime between 8 and 9 p.m. I'd started feeling dizzy around 9:30, just as they announced the prom court. By the time my name was called for junior prom queen, I was barely coherent. I'd stumbled on stage, slurred my speech, and eventually collapsed. Claire had rushed up to help me, taking the crown and accepting the applause while I was carried out on a stretcher. This time, I didn't go near the punch bowl. I'd brought my own water bottle, sealed and safe in my purse. I danced with friends, took pictures, and kept a careful eye on Claire. She kept glancing at me, confusion evident on her face. She'd expected me to be wearing the ugly yellow dress. Instead, I looked better than I ever had, and it was clearly bothering her. At 8:30, I saw her talking to Derek near the punch table. They thought they were being subtle, but I'd positioned myself with a clear view. Derek poured 2 cups of punch, and Claire palmed something from her purse. A small pill bottle, I knew, though I couldn't see it from this distance. She crushed several pills into one of the cups, stirring it carefully with her finger. My phone buzzed. Jessica had been filming from another angle, capturing the entire exchange. I sent her a thumbs-up emoji. Derek started walking toward me with the spiked drink, his smile wide and fake. "Hey, stranger," he said, offering me the cup. "Truce? I know things ended badly, but we can still be friends, right?" "I'm good," I said, holding up my water bottle. "Staying hydrated. You know how it is." His smile faltered. "Come on, just one drink. For old time's sake." I said no, Derek. My voice was firm enough that nearby couples turned to look. He flushed, anger flashing in his eyes before he turned away. I watched as he brought the drink back to Claire. They had a whispered argument, Claire's gestures growing increasingly agitated. Finally, she grabbed the cup and drank it herself, probably thinking she could water down the drugs enough to stay functional while getting rid of the evidence. Rookie mistake. 9 p.m. arrived and Principal Morrison took the stage to announce the prom court. My heart was pounding, adrenaline singing through my veins. This was it. This was the moment everything had fallen apart before. This was the moment I'd take back my crown. "And now for junior prom queen," Principal Morrison said, opening a gold envelope. "The winner is Sophia Martinez." The applause was deafening. I walked to the stage with my head high, my midnight blue dress swirling around my legs. Principal Morrison placed the crown on my head, a delicate silver tiara with rhinestones that caught the light like stars. I gave my speech, the same speech I'd planned in my previous life but never got to deliver, thanking my classmates and teachers and talking about the importance of kindness and community. I didn't mention my family. Their absence from my speech was deliberate and noted by several people in the audience. As I descended the stage, I saw Claire near the punch table. Her face was flushed, her eyes glassy, her movements uncoordinated. The drugs were kicking in faster than she'd anticipated, probably because she'd consumed them on an empty stomach. I'd noticed she'd skipped dinner, likely to fit into the tight red dress. Derek was trying to support her, but he looked panicked. They'd expected me to be the drugged one, not Claire. They had no plan B. Oh my God, Claire, are you okay? I rushed over, making sure my voice carried across the now quieting gymnasium. You look terrible. Did you drink something? I'm fine, Claire slurred, pushing me away. But she wasn't fine. She was very obviously not fine. Students were starting to stare, phones coming out to record. Someone call a teacher, I shouted. My sister needs help. The next 30 minutes were chaos. Teachers arrived, an ambulance was called, and Claire was taken to the hospital to have her stomach pumped. They found high levels of anxiety medication in her system, the same medication prescribed to my mother, which Claire had stolen from the medicine cabinet. Derek, in a panic, tried to claim that I'd given Claire the spiked drink, but multiple witnesses confirmed that I'd been nowhere near the punch bowl and had only drunk from my own water bottle. Then Jessica came forward with her video. The footage was damning. It clearly showed Claire and Derek conspiring, Claire crushing pills into the drink, and Derek attempting to give it to me. Principal Morrison watched it 3 times, her expression growing darker with each viewing. Miss Martinez, she said quietly, pulling me aside. Did you know they were planning this? I could have lied, but I didn't need to. I suspected something, I said carefully. Derek had been acting strange since our breakup, and Claire has she's always been jealous of me. But I never thought they'd actually try to drug me. It was technically true. I had suspected it because I'd lived through it before. We'll need to report this to the police, Principal Morrison said. This is attempted assault, and if Derek and Claire had succeeded, she trailed off, shaking her head. The police arrived around midnight. They took statements from everyone, collected Jessica's video as evidence, and confiscated the spiked punch cup. Derek cracked almost immediately, admitting to his role and pointing the finger at Claire. He claimed she'd convinced him to do it, that she'd said it would just make you loosen up and have fun. Claire, still groggy from having her stomach pumped, was arrested at the hospital. My parents arrived at the hospital around 1 a.m. My mother was hysterical, alternating between comforting Claire and glaring at me as if this were somehow my fault. My father looked exhausted and confused, clearly having been pulled from his home office in the middle of reviewing a brief. This is your fault, my mother hissed at me in the hospital corridor. You've always been jealous of your sister. You probably planned this whole thing to frame her. Mom, there's video evidence, I said calmly. Claire spiked a drink meant for me. She tried to drug me at prom in front of everyone. She would never, Mrs. Martinez, a police officer interrupted, holding a tablet. We need to speak with you about some irregularities we've found. Because of course I'd made sure they'd find those too. While investigating Claire's phone as part of the assault case, the police had discovered the catfishing evidence I'd planted. Dozens of conversations with underage boys, sexual in nature, all traced back to Claire's devices. It wasn't technically illegal since she was also underage, but it was enough to paint a picture of a troubled, manipulative teenager capable of exactly the kind of scheme she'd attempted at prom. They'd also found text messages between Claire and Derek discussing the prank they were planning, though Claire had been smart enough not to mention drugging specifically. The implication was clear. But the real bomb was still waiting to drop. I'd sent an anonymous email to the district attorney's office 2 days before prom. It contained detailed documentation of my mother's embezzlement, including bank statements, receipts, and recordings of phone conversations where she'd discussed transferring foundation money to her personal accounts. I'd timed the email to arrive the day after prom, knowing that my mother would be distracted by Claire's situation and unable to mount an adequate defense. The DA's office moved fast. By Monday morning, my mother was under investigation. By Wednesday, she'd been arrested. The charges included embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion, enough to put her away for several years, even with a plea deal. My father, to his credit, finally woke up. He hired expensive lawyers for both his wife and daughter, but the evidence was overwhelming. More importantly, he started asking questions about why his family had fallen apart so spectacularly in the span of a week. I gave him answers. I showed him the video of Claire destroying my prom dress. I showed him years' worth of text messages where my mother criticized and demeaned me while praising Claire for the bare minimum. I showed him report cards, teacher evaluations, and award certificates, all evidence of my academic excellence that had been ignored or downplayed by my mother. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, and for the first time in my life, I saw genuine emotion on his face. "Why didn't you say something?" "Would you have listened?" I countered. "You're never home, Dad. You have been choosing work over family for years. When was I supposed to tell you? During one of the 15-minute dinners we have twice a month?" He had no answer for that. The trials plural, dominated the summer. Claire was tried as a juvenile for attempted assault. Derek, who was 18, was tried as an adult. The prosecution argued that this was a premeditated attack intended to humiliate and potentially cause serious harm. The defense tried to paint it as a prank gone wrong. The jury didn't buy it. Derek was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison plus probation. Claire was sentenced to time in a juvenile facility until she turned 18, followed by mandatory therapy and community service. My mother's trial was more complex. She'd stolen over $300,000 from her charity foundation over the course of 5 years, using the money to fund a lifestyle that her husband's income alone couldn't support. Designer clothes, spa treatments, luxury vacations disguised as foundation business. It all came out in court. She was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. And my father? He divorced my mother and fought for sole custody of me. For the first time in my 17 years of life, he started coming home for dinner. He started asking about my day, my friends, my dreams. He started being a parent. It was too little, too late. But I accepted it. I needed his support for the next phase of my plan, because I wasn't done yet. Claire's catfishing scheme, the one that had been discovered during the initial investigation, had a twist I'd been saving. One of the boys she'd been talking to was the son of a very prominent family, a family that did not appreciate having their teenage son manipulated by a predator. Even though Claire was also a minor, the family sued for emotional distress. The lawsuit dragged on for months, but eventually settled for $50,000, money that Claire didn't have and my father refused to pay. The judgment would follow her into adulthood, making it nearly impossible for her to build a normal life. She'd have to disclose it on job applications, apartment rentals, and loan applications for years to come. As for Derek, his football scholarship was revoked. His college acceptance was withdrawn. He'd been planning to study at State on a full ride, but no school wanted to take a chance on a convicted felon, no matter how good his spiral throw was. Last I heard, he was working at a warehouse and living with his parents, his dreams of professional football dead at 18. I went back to school in the fall as a senior, wearing my junior prom crown to the first day of class like the petty queen I was. The hallways parted for me, everyone whispering and pointing. I'd become a legend. The girl who'd outsmarted her own sister, who'd survived a drugging attempt and brought down her entire corrupt family in the process. Some people thought I was a hero. Others thought I was ruthless. I didn't particularly care what any of them thought. I spent my senior year focusing on myself. I joined clubs I actually enjoyed, not ones that looked good on college applications. I made friends with people who liked me, not for my popularity or my status. I dated a sweet guy named Marcus who played guitar and wrote poetry and treated me like I was precious. I also started therapy. Real therapy, not the forced medication I'd endured in my previous life. I needed to process what I'd been through, both the trauma of my first life and the moral complexity of my revenge in this one. My therapist, Dr. Chen, was patient and insightful, helping me work through my anger and pain without judgment. "Do you regret what you did?" she asked me once. "No," I said honestly. They tried to destroy me. I just defended myself. "With extreme prejudice," she noted. "Is there any other kind?" She smiled slightly. "Just make sure that revenge doesn't consume you, Sophia. You've won. Now you need to figure out how to live." She was right, of course. Revenge had sustained me through the darkest months of my second life, but it couldn't be my whole identity. I needed to become someone beyond the girl who'd outsmarted her villainous family. So I threw myself into my future. I applied to colleges across the country, settling eventually on a prestigious university in California. Far enough from home to start fresh, but accessible enough that I could return if needed. I got a full scholarship based on my academics and my compelling personal story, as the admissions officer had delicately put it. I graduated valedictorian, giving a speech about resilience and self-advocacy that made half the audience cry and the other half uncomfortable. My father attended, sitting alone in the crowd with tears streaming down his face. Claire and my mother were still incarcerated, and Derek was banned from school property as part of his parole. The summer before college, I did something I'd never done in my first life. I traveled. My father, guilt-ridden and desperate to make amends, funded a 3-month trip through Europe. I saw Paris, Rome, Barcelona, and London. I ate incredible food, met interesting people, and started to understand who I was when I wasn't defined by my family's abuse or my need for revenge. I was still Sophia Martinez, but I was Sophia Martinez unchained. College was a revelation. Nobody knew my story. Nobody knew about my sister, or my mother, or the dramatic prom night that had become local legend. I was just another freshman, navigating classes and social dynamics and terrible dining hall food. I loved it. I majored in psychology and criminology, fascinated by the systems that had both failed and saved me. I wanted to understand why people became abusers, how families could be so toxic, and what interventions actually worked. I volunteered at a local women's shelter, using my own experience to connect with survivors of family violence. And I thrived. I made Dean's List every semester. I published research papers. I presented at conferences. I became someone my 17-year-old self would have been proud of. My father and I maintained a relationship, though it was complicated. He visited me at school and we had dinner once a month via video chat. He was trying, genuinely trying, to be the father he should have been all along. I appreciated it, but I couldn't forget the years he'd ignored me, the times he'd chosen work over family, the way he'd signed those commitment papers in my first life without even questioning whether I was actually mentally ill. Some wounds heal, others just scar over. Claire was released from juvenile detention when she turned 18, just as I was starting my sophomore year of college. She reached out to me via email, a rambling message about how sorry she was, how she'd changed, how she hoped we could rebuild our relationship. I deleted it without responding. A month later, she tried again, and again, and again. Each message was more desperate than the last, promising that she was different, that she was in therapy, that she understood how much she'd hurt me. Finally, I responded, "You tried to destroy me because you were jealous. You drugged me, framed me, and supported Mom in stealing from charity. You don't get forgiveness. You get consequences. Live with them." She didn't email again. My mother was released after serving 3 years of her 5-year sentence, her time reduced for good behavior. I heard about it from my father, who'd carefully maintained complete separation from his ex-wife. She'd lost everything: her social standing, her charity position, her country club membership, her friends. She was working as a receptionist at a dental office and living in a small apartment on the wrong side of town. Part of me felt satisfaction at her downfall, but mostly I just felt tired. Revenge had been sweet, but it hadn't healed the hurt she'd caused. It had just evened the scales. I graduated college summa cum laude and was accepted into a prestigious graduate program for forensic psychology. My research focused on family violence and the long-term psychological effects of parental favoritism. I interviewed hundreds of subjects, including adults who'd been scapegoated by their families and others who'd been the golden children. The findings were fascinating and depressing in equal measure. Most of the scapegoats had severe psychological scarring that persisted for decades. Many had cut off contact with their families entirely. Some had managed to heal through therapy and support systems, but the pain never fully disappeared. The golden children, interestingly, often struggled too. They'd been raised to believe they were special without having to earn it, leading to narcissistic traits and an inability to handle criticism or failure in adulthood. Many of them had crashed and burned when they entered the real world and discovered that nobody would give them special treatment anymore. I thought of Claire when I wrote those sections. In another life, maybe I would have pitied her. She'd been raised to be a monster by a mother who'd valued beauty over character and enabled cruelty over kindness. But pity didn't erase what she'd done to me. It didn't bring back the life I'd lost the first time. I published my dissertation to significant acclaim in the psychology community. I was offered a faculty position at my university, which I accepted. At 25, I became one of the youngest professors in the department, teaching courses on family systems and criminal psychology. My students loved me. I was approachable and engaging, using real-world examples to illustrate complex theories. I never told them my own story. That would have been inappropriate and possibly triggering, but I hinted that I had personal experience with family trauma. It made me more relatable, more human. I also started dating seriously for the first time since high school. Marcus, my sweet poet boyfriend from senior year, had stayed in touch through college. We'd been friends for years, supporting each other through exams and breakups and identity crises. When he moved to my city for a job opportunity, we reconnected in person. It turned out that absence and maturity had transformed our high school romance into something deeper. We started dating again, slowly and carefully, both of us wary of rushing into something serious. But it worked. He understood my trauma without being intimidated by it. He was patient with my trust issues and supportive of my career. We got engaged on my 27th birthday at the top of a mountain we'd hiked together in Colorado. The ring was simple and beautiful, exactly what I would have chosen for myself. My father cried when I told him. He'd been hoping I'd find happiness, he said, after everything I'd been through. He wanted to walk me down the aisle if I'd let him. I said yes. Not because he'd earned it, but because I was ready to let go of some of my anger. Holding on to it was exhausting, and I wanted to move forward without the weight of the past dragging me down. The wedding was small and intimate, just close friends and a few family members. My father attended. My mother and Claire did not receive invitations. Derek, last I'd heard, was still working his warehouse job and had a kid with a woman he'd knocked up during a one-night stand. He was not invited either. It was the happiest day of my life, surrounded by people who genuinely loved me, celebrating a future I'd built from the ashes of a destroyed past. On my wedding night, Marcus and I sat on the balcony of our hotel room, watching the city lights twinkle below us. He held my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm, and asked me a question that had clearly been on his mind for a while. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different? If your family hadn't been so awful, if prom had gone the way it was supposed to? I considered the question carefully. In my first life, I'd died alone and broken. In this life, I'd become someone strong and successful and loved. The path had been painful, but it had led me here. To this moment, this man, this life I'd built for myself. No, I said finally. I don't wonder, because if things had been different, I wouldn't be who I am now, and I like who I am. He smiled and kissed my forehead. I like who you are too. Years passed. I published more research, earned tenure, became a recognized expert in my field. Marcus and I bought a house, adopted a dog, started talking about kids. My father became a grandfather to my colleagues' children and sent me photos constantly, clearly hungry for the family connection he'd neglected for so long. I never saw my mother or Claire again. I heard through my father that they'd both moved to different states, trying to escape the reputation that followed them. Claire had apparently gotten her GED and was working in retail, still single, still struggling. My mother had remarried a man who worked in insurance and lived in a modest suburban home, a far cry from the mansion she'd ruled over during my childhood. Sometimes I felt guilty about how thoroughly I'd destroyed them. But then I'd remember they'd tried to destroy me first. I'd just been better at it. And sometimes late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd remember my first life. The drugged drink, the humiliation, the psychiatric facility, the bedsheet and the door hinge. I'd remember the hopelessness, the certainty that nobody would believe me, that I'd never escape the hell my family had created for me. Then I'd look at Marcus sleeping beside me, at the career accomplishments framed on my office wall, at the life I'd built from nothing but determination and the strange gift of a second chance. And I'd know that every moment of revenge, every calculated move, every difficult decision had been worth it. I was Sophia Martinez, PhD. I was a survivor, a professor, a wife, and soon-to-be mother. I was someone who'd been given the rarest gift in the universe, the chance to rewrite a tragic story, and I'd turned it into a triumph. My sister had tried to steal my crown, but in the end, I'd taken everything. And I'd done it all without apology, without regret, and without looking back. The prom crown still sits on my office shelf, a reminder of where I came from and what I'd overcome. Students sometimes ask about it, and I tell them a simplified version of the story, about a sister who tried to sabotage me, about learning to stand up for myself, about the importance of evidence and strategy when confronting abuse. I don't tell them about being reborn. I don't tell them about the life I'd lost or the years of planning it took to execute my revenge. Those details are mine alone, locked away in a part of my heart that nobody else can access. But I do tell them this. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you will be the ones who hurt you most, and when that happens, you have two choices. You can let them destroy you, or you can become someone they can't touch. I chose the latter, and I'd choose it again, every single time. The crown catches the light as I speak, rhinestones sparkling like stars, like hope, like justice served cold and sweet and utterly complete. And every time I see it, I smile and remember I won.